Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, cowboys and cowgirls. Toughen up, because you're in town, in the town that's too tough to die. Tombstone, Arizona. Gentlemen, check your guns, make sure you tip your hat to the ladies, and get ready to hear Tales of Old Tombstone with Stuart Rosebrook and Bob Boze. And the program, it's ready for you, and it starts right now.
To the town of our free rode a stranger one fine day. Hardly spoke to folks around him, didn't have too much to say. No one dared to ask his business, no one dared to make a slip. The stranger there among them had a big iron on his hip, big iron on his hip.
Welcome to Tales of Old Tombstone. Thanks, Stan, for that great introduction. Today it's Stuart Rosebrook and Bob Boze with our special guest, Phil Spangenberger, who's going to talk to us about the firearms of the Old West. Welcome to the show, Phil.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Phil, we are really looking forward to talking today about firearms, which seem to be probably one of the top subjects when you get a group of Old West aficionados, historians, and researchers together, even fans of the Western movies. They love to talk and nitpick about guns of the Old West. And we were talking before the show, and Bob and I have discussed the first time he ever visited Tombstone, and we thought we'd kick this off today and say, you know, Phil, when did you first remember learning and hearing about the town of Tombstone, and when did you first go to the town too tough to die?
Well, I think I first heard about the town of Tombstone at some point when I was a kid, because I grew up in the age when there were, Westerns on radio, Westerns on TV, and, the Tales of Wyatt Earp. I used to watch that with Hugh O'Brien, and so I was very aware of Tombstone as a town. And the first time I actually got to go to it was when I was stationed in El Paso in the Army, and I had met a young lady. She was a colonel's daughter. He was stationed at Fort Huachuca. So I went and spent a weekend at the colonel's place, and then she and I went and visited Tombstone, and we just had a great time. It was, there's hardly anybody there, but it was a neat old place to see.
Now, when was this, Phil? Was this 1920 or earlier?
All right, goodbye, guys. It was 1963. Let's see.
And there wasn't
actually
19 there. That's kind of odd, because the town was kind of rejuvenated by the movies starting in the 30s. And so why do you suppose it was so quiet?
I think it was probably it might have been I don't remember if it was a weekend or a weekday. There wasn't too many people, though, there. I was actually, I think it was early 1965, late 64 or 65 when I actually got there. But, it was pleasant to walk around and see everything. The streets, it was paved then, I think it looked so great when they put the dirt over the street for the stagecoaches to go down there and so on. But it was a paved road then. And I'd been there a number of times since then, but that was the very first time.
Something that you bring up there that I think is interesting is the town has gone in surges from the very beginning. It was a huge boom town, then the floods came, everybody left, and then they brought in pumps, and then it kind of had a slight resurgence, and then it went down, and by the 20s it was a leaning wreck, and then Stuart Lake's book, The Frontier Marshal, comes out, and there's this resurgence, and then Hugh O'Brien comes out, and then it sags again. And I heard that because of the movie Tombstone, their tourism spiked up into I think 200,000 a year, somewhere in that zone, and it's gone down 10% every year. So this must be an ebb and flow in that town.
I think so, yeah. It was always an interesting place. I remember, oh God, I think it was sometime in the late 70s or early 80s. And there were two guys that were there, and they were having a feud. And I guess one guy took a shot at the other guy, and this one fellow was complaining to me about it. And I said, "This is Tombstone. Nobody likes a whiner."
Well, of course, Phil, the first time I ever saw you was I was compelled. I was living in Phoenix, and I didn't see anything about it in the press, but I just knew that I had to be in Tombstone on October 26, 1981. And so I took my daughter to Tucson, left her with Grandma, and with a friend, John Wyckoff. We drove down there. We went into the corral, and there's probably 150 people there. And the guy put on a show was a young guy that was just absolutely fantastic with guns, and that was Phil Spangenberger. And that's the first time I saw you. I
remember him.
Yeah. What do you remember about that day? That was Bob. Is it Bob Love, or the person who owned the corral? He got up and made some comments. It was a centennial. Richard Argnarski was there. I met Bob McCubbin was there. So many people that later became so important in my life. I met there that day because I just drove there.
John Bianchi, and I had known John, but Richard Argnarski I met there, and Jeff Morey.
That's right.
We became instant friends. I'll tell you a funny quick story. When I showed up, Harold Love, who used to own the Tombstone Epitaph, had invited me down through Guns and Ammo to see if we wanted to do some coverage. And of course we did, because of my interest in the black powder Old West firearms and Guns and Ammo in general. So I rented a car, and when I drove into town, I'm getting out of the car, and a fella comes up to me and he says, Wes Flowers would like to meet you. I didn't know who Wes Flowers was. And I said, okay. I said, well, I'll be here the entire weekend. Tell him to come on down and say hello. And he said, no, you don't. Wes Flowers doesn't come to you. You go to him. And I said, I'm sorry, but I'm here to do a show, and I'm be pretty busy down here the whole time. So I'd like to say hello to him, whoever he is. But, and this went on the entire weekend. He was one of the local guys that was evidently felt miffed because he was left out of the celebrations, and he went out in the street, and they tried to talk me into going and doing a fast draw contest with him. I said, I'm here to do a show, not to be putting on competition or anything. And I said, and he probably uses all the modern rigs. I use the old time stuff. So anyways, I finally told him I would do it. But then at the last minute, I just said, the heck with it. I'm not here for him. And so every hour he would go out and they would make an announcement. Wes Flowers versus Phil Spangenberger, 11 o'clock. Wes Flowers versus Phil Spangenberger, 12 o'clock. And it went on all afternoon, and we never did meet.
What's funny is I was just down there 2 weeks ago, and they're still saying that.
Well, they must be holding their breath.
It's a small town, dude. It's a small town.
Funny, but they kind of took from the Oriental Saloon on that street further, and then the group I was with, we didn't go past the Crystal Palace, so it was almost like in the Old West. I felt like the gunfighter coming to town, and my reputation preceded me, and I said, this is real life following art, It was funny. I actually met him years later, and he was a nice fella, but he never said anything about that deal, so I guess he was embarrassed.
Well, Phil, one of the things that the credibility you've given True West Magazine is just absolutely phenomenal, and I thank you for that.
Thanks.
How many years have you been doing this for us at True West?
20 years, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's been 2 decades, and it's been great. And what's the strangest question you've gotten about guns? You get any weird ones?
Oh, well, I think years ago at Guns and Ammo, somebody said to me, once they developed smokeless powder, they realized that you could take a large case and turn it into a bottleneck with a smaller bullet and get more power. Why didn't they do that with muzzle loaders? And I said, think about it. You can pour all the powder you want down the bore of a muzzle loader, but you're only going to burn so much. It burns at a certain rate, and that's it. And I thought that was a weird one. But most of the questions, they're okay, but that was a strange one. That really got me. I said, it's like putting a third pedal on a bicycle. The more powder you put in doesn't mean you're going to get more power. You're just wasting more powder.
Now, you've worked on some legendary movies and shows, and you're kind of the go-to expert, aren't you? Were you the go-to guy to come to you for Tombstone?
No, not really. There were a couple of different. Actually, Jeff Morey wrote the I guess you would say the synopsis in the chronological order originally for that, and then there were other people that took over. Peter Sherayko with his Buckaroos to give it that authentic look, and just a whole group of different people that were really interested in the Old West. About the only thing I had to do with that movie is I got a call from the production company, and my company, Red River, that I ran at the time, we made up the gun belts and holsters for the ruralis for the opening scenes. We had to make one brown set for the officer, and then I think 10 or 11 or a dozen black ones for the supposedly the regular ruralis officers, the men. And that's all that I really did. I think there were a lot of other holsters that I had made through the years that appeared in the movie, but that was the only thing I really did on that film. I worked on a lot of others, but not that one.
Now,
I did a lot for Wyatt Earp.
You have the eye, and I always, every time you and I are at an event, I always like pulling your ear about authenticity in movies. In your mind, what are the most authentic Westerns to your eye?
Well, I'd have to say Tombstone, as far as the visual, the saddles and the clothing and the colorful clothing, because the Westerns are outdoors, so many art directors, they get this thing in their mind, we got to use earth colors. So everybody's wearing brown and gray and, things like that, muted colors. Whereas in Tombstone, you've got bright red shirts and blue shirts with yellow trim and so on, and things that they actually did wear. So I would say visually that is one of the most. It's got a great feeling overall. There's a lot of great Westerns that, while every detail may not be perfect, but they've got touches of things. The Searchers, to me, my favorite all-time movie. And what I like about it is the feeling of those people on that lonesome frontier, what's supposed to be Texas, actually Monument Valley. But as the woman, Olive Carey says, we happen to be Texians or Texicans, and maybe it'll be our bones in the ground before something comes to this place, but we're here now, and so on. And there's feeling in that. Shane has a lot of authentic feelings to it. There's so many of them, but overall, I think with the most points, I'd have to say Tombstone is the winner. That's just my opinion. And a lot of others.
You say, give me an example of just a movie you can't watch because the weapons are so bad.
A movie that I can't watch?
Yeah, you give us a couple of examples of movies that you wanted to like, but the weapons were so bad. They're using an 1895 Winchester and an 1876 movie.
Yeah, well, I never, even though there are modern day Westerns, you might say, I never liked any of those Billy Jack movies. And I'm not a big fan of the spaghetti Westerns because it's so overdone, although they do have some great moments in them. But there was one I saw, and I don't even know if people remember it. I think it was called The Last Gunfighter. And I think it was what's his name, Tom something, that played Billy Jack. It was supposed to be early California. and they were dueling with samurais, and I thought, oh my God.
And there was an original, wasn't the original Last Gunfighter with Gregory Peck?
Well, no, that was just The Gunfighter.
The Gunfighter, right, with Gregory Peck.
And that's a pretty good movie too. I like it.
Right. Tin Star, Gunfighter, High Noon. There was a whole series of those of men facing their last days, or facing their soul, and whether they were going to live or die.
Yeah, but there are some films that I just say, oh no, count me out.
Well, we're going to take a quick break here, and we're going to have some sponsors. I'll have a message here following this break. We're going to come back and talk to Phil about the real firearms of Tombstone in the days of the Earps and the Cowboys.
And Tales of Old Tombstone comes to you from Tombstone, Arizona, and from Tombstone Monument Ranch. And let me introduce the man who's right there right now, Russell True. Welcome to the program, and tell us about the place.
Well, I'm here at the ranch that started True Ranch Collection, our little group of historic dude ranches across a few states, Arizona, Wyoming, and Montana. And in some ways, it's like that first child. It maybe is our favorite. It's this great historic 1880s cattle ranch that was founded by German immigrants back when Geronimo was still roaming around the area, terrorizing the ranchers and anyone who was in the area. He didn't surrender for his third and final time till 1886. So the ranch goes back to that. And then a dude ranch was created, and we were fortunate enough to be able to buy it. And it is still a place that feels like it should, the Old West. It just exudes that old Tombstone story of mining, ranchers, and gunfights, all very real. And yet when you're here, of course, it just feels like fun in the Old West. And I get to come down here every now and then and enjoy that unique Tombstone atmosphere. Our rooms are in the old town that was created to be that. The saloon feels like Wyatt Earp might walk in at any time. And it just, plus it's still a cattle ranch. So 140 plus years of cattle ranching. We raise the unique breed of cattle, Criollo, which are purebred Spanish cattle brought over by Columbus in 1493, do roundups twice a year. So it's Tombstone, historic ranching, historic cattle, all wrapped in the fun atmosphere that is unique to this ranch.
Well, we're back with our special guests. This is Stuart Rosebrook with Bob Boze Bell, and our special guest is Phil Spangenberger, and we are talking firearms of the Old West today. And in Tales of Old Tombstone, one of the subjects that comes up over and over and over, whether it's in print or radio or film or television, and that is the firearms of Tombstone, and what did the men and women really carry in Tombstone during the feuding days of the Earps and the Clantons. Phil, what's one of the big ones that we see all the time in the movies? The Buntline Special, and what is it? It's got it's almost a cartoon caricature of a firearm. Let's start there. Let's talk about the guns that actually the Earps and the Clantons would have been carrying.
Well, the Buntline Special probably wasn't even in Tombstone. Supposedly Ned Buntline had made a gift to a few friends, special ordered 10 or 12 inch barrels on the standard Colt single action. But there's no proof or any evidence that it was ever involved in anything around Tombstone. And it's one of those things that people argue and debate all the time, and it keeps it fun. But the most classic arms, 1881 is relatively early in the history of the single action Colt, and the single action Colt is by far the most popular handgun of the Old West, and especially a 45 Colt and that caliber. It was a very powerful round. The 45 Colt black powder load with 40 grains of black powder and a 250 grain bullet was the most powerful commercially made cartridge up to the advent of the 357 Magnum. A lot of people don't realize that. And you can't even get a modern cartridge with 40 grains in it in the shell, because the old-time casings had what they call balloon head. They were hollow because the primers were different, and you could fit 40 grains of black powder in. Today, I think you probably maybe 35, 36 grains, but that's still a pretty potent load with a 250 grain bullet.
You know, it's interesting, Phil, I'm of the same mind as you are about the bunt line, but Jeff Morey, one time when this subject came up, he showed me a line from the Spicer hearing, I believe it was, and the quotation from the hearing is, "And where was Mr. Earp standing?" And the witness says he was by the Fly's boarding house front window, and then he says, and what was he carrying? And he says he was carrying a Colt with a 12-inch barrel. And that's on
I know. I'm familiar with that part of the hearing. However, you look at it, the 7.5 inch, which was the most common barrel. The Colts started making 5.5 inch barrels somewhere around 1878 for civilian usage. But by 1881, the most common barrel length was still the 7.5 inch. And from someone across the street, if they're not real gun savvy, and even some people that are, I mean, I've looked at 7.5 inch barrels from a distance and say, boy, that's a big looking gun. And I don't know how anybody, is basically like across the street, how he could get a measurement like that.
Yeah, it's just it's intriguing that, and of course Jeff loved that because it just flew right in the face of what we all talk about to dismiss it,
Sure.
And then he comes in with that.
Well, there was also some comment that he had a shiny pistol. Well, a blued revolver, if it's new condition, which most of the guns would have been at that point, they still look pretty shiny, and when you're outdoors. So,
and where do you come in on the argument that some people believe? In fact, I think the pistol is at the Autry Museum. The Earp was carrying a Smith & Wesson. Of course, that's controversial because John Gilcrease sold that gun, I believe, to the Autry, and it was for sale several years earlier as the Clum gun. Do you know about that?
Yeah, is that the one that had some Chinese symbols on it, or somehow was involved with the anti-Chinese league that they had at that time?
I'm not familiar with that. I'm just that for a while there, probably in the 80s, there was this idea that Earp was carrying a Smith & Wesson. And in fact, Franklin Mint came out with a version of it. I have it on my wall here.
That was supposed
to. Evidence kind of swung the other way, probably through experts like you, that it probably more than probably was a Colt. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's what I feel. And although he could have had an American, which is a long-barreled, 8-inch barreled revolver, and those things, they're amazing because they do look so long from a distance. And I mean, how many people say, "Oh my God, that man must have been 8 feet tall," when he's actually 6'4", because everybody around him is 5'10".
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with the firearms.
Hey, what's the strangest weapon that you've ever encountered in the Old West, where there is a pepper box or some sort of strange weapon that most people don't know about?
Yeah, that time was quite an evolutionary period in firearms, and there were a lot of guns that were designed that they never went very far, or something. There was one called the Apache, which was kind of like a knuckle duster and a revolver, and it had a little bayonet on it. I mean, that's a strange little bugger. And and also
so it was brass knuckles on, I assume, on the grip, so you could punch somebody.
Yeah, exactly. And So you fire the gun till it's empty, stab the guy, and then slug him.
I want to see that in a movie.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see something like that used. Yeah, and of course, as far as long guns, the Evans. Most people never even heard of an Evans, and we talk about a Winchester with their 15 rounds, or the Henry with their 15, 16 shots. The Evans held 28 cartridges.
Ay.
Wow.
They only made like 12,500 of them. So you don't see them. The only time I've ever seen it on film is in Tom Selleck's Crossfire Trails. Wilford Brimley carries one. It's an ugly look.
See, that was worth the show right there. Give us that. I'm going to go look that up right now. Thank you, Phil.
Yeah, Wilford Brimley's got it, and I think he even complains about it or something. But it's an odd duck, that's for sure.
So would you say that a lot of times men and women were choosing guns based on not only their ease of use, but their weight, because they were also, they use them hunting, they use them on and off horseback. What do you think when the Earps and the Clantons were buying their firearms, what were the preeminent reasons they were buying them for?
Well, I think the Earps, they weren't particularly hunters. Wyatt had been involved in buffalo hunting a little bit, and I'm not sure about his brothers. I mean, a lot of them, they were in law enforcement or the other side of the law with some of their activities. And of course, the Cowboys, they were rustlers, they were ranchers. And I think, especially since they're in the Southwest, a lot of those guys came from New Mexico and Texas, and they wound up in Arizona. John Boznecker's book, Ride the Devil's Herd or something like that?
That's right.
Yep.
And that's a great book telling about where these people come from. And I think their primary purpose is defense, if not offense, especially in Indian country, which was almost the entire Southwest then. And if they doubled for hunting, so be it. More power to them. And a Winchester 4440 would certainly take any medium-sized game, and there wasn't many buffalo in the Southwest, so you're looking at deer or something like that.
And why would someone carry a shotgun?
Oh, you can pot small game, rabbits, birds, and if an immigrant going west could only afford one gun, there's nothing better than a shotgun. You can load it, especially a double-barreled. You can load it with shot for small game, or buck and ball for dangerous game or other men, and it's least expensive compared to a handgun or a repeating rifle. And once they spend all their money on their wagons and their teams and their, the food and getting a family out there, and even the outlaws, if they could, it's one Westerner up in the Nevada area has said, "I've been stabbed to the hill, or stabbed up to the Green River with a Skinner, and I've been, did this and that, all the things that happened to him, but I never really was scared that much until I stared down the barrel of a double-barreled 12-gauge shotgun. My God, it looked like the Sutro Tunnel."
That's fantastic.
Well, earlier, Phil, we were talking about the horsemen of the Southwest and the tools of the trade of the working cowboy, the cavalry, and ranchers, rustlers, and outlaws. And you are quite the horseman yourself. And so in our third segment, we want to talk a little bit about the weapons of choice for the men who worked the cattle and had to spend a lifetime on horseback, and what their favorite weapons were, and saddles and other tack that would get them across the Southwest. We'll be right back on Tales of Old Tombstone. glad to promote the next issue of True West Magazine. It's the May-June issue of 2024, and our cover story is Bass Reeves finally gets his due in True West Magazine. Bob, what's the story behind Bass Reeves?
Well, it's a great story, and we were really shocked at how we hadn't covered him in so many years, and it wasn't until relatively recently that we covered him. But boy, we made up for lost time, and I'm very proud of your work, Stuart, on what you were able to uncover, along with Art T. Burton, who was just fantastic.
Art Burton is really the world's expert on Bass Reeves, who many consider, including Art, America's greatest law officer on the American frontier. So if you pick up this issue, you're going to learn the real story behind the life and legend of Bass Reeves across the Oklahoma and Indian territories in the 19th century. What else do we have in this issue, Bob?
Well, I want to say, just in addition to that, if you saw the Taylor Sheridan's Good, this really spells out what they left out, but they didn't quite get right. And I think that's worth the price of admission right there.
It's a great issue to take with you as you travel this summer, because we've got an extension of our ultimate True West travel guide, the best scenic highways and historic hotels, lodges, and saloons. We've taken a deep dive on 12 Western states, and it's time to pack your bags and hit the road, even on old Route 66, and discover the legends and lore of the Old West and walk where history happened. We also have some other great features, Bob, one of them by Linda Sanchez, one of our contributing editors.
Yeah, Chasing Pancho Villa, the Apache Scouts' final mission. Excellent. Always she has the greatest coverage. Also, I love this. How did Custer almost kill Edward S. Curtis? You got to check that one out.
Yep, this is a double issue, and I think that all of our readers and new readers who want to find True West Magazine, whether it's coming in your mailbox or down at your local grocery store or your favorite bookstore, make sure and go in and request it. So it's on the newsstand when new subscribers show up looking for True West. We're there to show you the way across the American West. True West Magazine, publishing since 1953. We're on the Tales of Old Tombstone, and we're back with Bob Boze and Phil Spangenberger, and we've been talking about life in Cochise County and the American Southwest in the late 1870s and early 1880s. And Phil, you have been a horseman most of your life, and you're very well known across the West as not only an expert of firearms, but also of horses and historic tack. So we thought we'd talk a little bit about the era of the late 1870s and 1880s and how you would tack up and the weapons that would work well if you're on the trail all day or for weeks at a time.
Sure thing. Well, the saddlery of that period, the horses were built differently. A lot of them were wild Mustangs that they'd catch, and we didn't have the modern quarter horses, which if they're the what do they call, the bulldog quarters with their round backs and real stocky bodies. But if you have like an appendix quarter, which is part thoroughbred, part quarter, and they use them for the quarter horse racing, they've got higher withers. And the old time saddles, those A-fork or slick fork saddles, were made with high gullets, and they were somewhat narrower. And through the years, I've always had to, when I'm buying horses, because I had so much money invested in period saddles or reproductions of them, I had to make sure that any horse I bought had good withers and a good back, and I'd make sure I'd take one or two of my saddles with me when I was looking, and if it didn't fit, then I couldn't buy the horse, no matter how good it was. But the old slick fork saddles, those things, they were made for people who rode all day, every day. And they put the weight of the person's body more over the horse's shoulders rather than in a modern pleasure saddle, which will put him further back towards the kidneys of the horse. And for long riding and everyday riding, those old saddles were great on those horses. Now, that doesn't mean you can put it on a modern horse unless the horse has the build for it. I heard guys in the movies.
I have to admit, I have a kind of a prejudice against, but when you see a movie full of all quarter horses, it just doesn't ring true. Like it's one of the reasons I love Lonesome Dove is because Tommy Lee Jones brought his polo ponies with him, and he rode what they call the fictional name of his horse was Hell Bitch, and he would in most movies, westerns, the actor comes in at a walk, into the scene and dismounts and goes, "Well, I told you where they were going." And in every scene, Tommy Lee comes in at a full gallop and dismounts that pony. And to me, that is so accurate. How do you feel about that?
Well, those are quarter horses too, but they're quarter horses with that had the proper build and so on. As a matter of fact, I had my gray horse for many years, Nevada, that I had trained to bow by the legendary Glenn Randall, who trained all of Roy Rogers and Gene Autry's horses and so on. And I had known Glenn, so he trained her for me. But at one point, after they filmed Lonesome Dove, one of the wranglers, they said, they're going to do a sequel on it. We'd like to rent your horse. And I said, only if I go with her. And, of course, that quoted that deal. And that was fine because I really didn't want to do that. But they said, God, we wish we'd have known about this horse. She'd have been a perfect hell bitch because she was a mare as well. The one they used in the movies was, I think they had a couple of them, and one of them was a gelding, as I recall. But most people aren't looking there.
Well, that's what I look for. I always look for the horses, the high back saddles, and the right Winchesters. That's kind of my a deal. In fact, I've ruined watching westerns with my family because if the western comes on and somebody has the clicker, they look at me and they say, "Dad, are you going to talk through the movie?" And I said, "I sure am," and they leave.
It's funny. Another thing is spurs. People today, oh, what do you use spurs for? You don't need spurs. Well, they haven't ridden some of the horses that we've ridden, or been in situations, and get stuck in quicksand. You're glad to have spurs, or things like that. There are times when everything's needed, but it must be used properly.
Most definitely. Most definitely. And Phil, and when you see whether if you were saddling up in the late 1870s, 1880s, how would you wear your gear, stow your gear? There's been conversations about which direction your scabbard would be, and would most of the times if you're going out, you're going to be carrying long arms as well as your short arms, and would you wear them on your waist, or would you have them in your back in your saddlebags or on a pommel bag?
Me personally, I would have a single action or, whatever revolver I'm carrying on my waist or hip, right side with the butt to the rear. I like that position. And, but if I had a lot of gear with me, I might want to use it as a cross draw. So it depends on some of the gear that I'm carrying with me. As far as a long arm, if I'm not going to be doing a lot of rough riding, I like what they call the California horn loop. It's a loop that fits over the horn of the saddle, and you take your rifle and you run it through that, and it's like laying across your lap. Now, you can run with it and so on, but you've got to hold on to the stock, otherwise it's going to be bouncing around. But if you don't want to use that, then you've got the typical scabbard, and it can go in the front, on either side, or the back. I have an old injury that for years plagued me on my left leg, and so I would carry when I'd carry a Winchester, or I did a lot of hunting with a 45-70 or a big 50 Sharps, and I would carry that to the right forward position because if I had to stretch a leg out, it was the right leg, and my left leg could hang more normally, and I wouldn't be in such pain. But that was from an old horse injury. Doesn't affect me now as much as it did years ago, but that was one of the reasons that I put my rifle where I did. And if I had a rope that would just go tied to the pommel of the saddle, and it could fit around the stock of the rifle, and you could just pull it right off if you needed it. So it just depends. And the cavalry, in the 1870s and 80s, they liked it behind them on the right side in either carbine socket or a small boot. But a lot of the troopers, would make a horn-type loop, but because the McClellan didn't have a horn, it'd have straps, and it would go through the gullet in the pommel. So it just depends on the gear and the person.
And do you think at the time of the Clantons and the Earps that that the newest firearms were making their way into the Arizona Territory, and they could be found either for sale in Tombstone or in Tucson, or would they mail order for them? How did people purchase their firearms in those days if they hadn't brought them with them when they arrived in town?
Well, both ways. It was a fool that traveled that country without any firearm. So I would think most of them would have, if they're traveling on their own, they would have firearms that they'd purchased earlier. If they came by stagecoach, a lot of the coaches would have weapons in them for the passengers' usage as they're going through hostile country. And of course, with the train, it's not so important. But if they got into town and needed to purchase a weapon or ammunition, then of course there are a couple of gun shops. One, the most famous one, Spangenberger's, which everybody in the world seems to think that one of my relatives owned it. And I said, no, we have an ER on the end of our name, so it wasn't our place. But when I was with, even with True West, people call in and say, oh, and is that part of your family? And I wish.
Now, what about the women in at the time? Were all girls raised on the frontier, savvy with weapons, and then were they known to carry weapons for self-defense?
Well, again, personal choice, but I think any of the smart families, if they were in a country that, you faced dangers, or maybe the woman had to go out and help hunt, then they would definitely teach them to use firearms. And but like on the ranches, they wouldn't have any need for the little pocket pistols and hideout pistols that the ladies in town, the soiled doves and so on, would carry. But the women out in the frontier, they'd probably get used to a shotgun or a lever action rifle. There's almost no kick to a 44-40. So, even the daintiest ladies can fire those. Like today, the anti-gunners, they like to talk about, how powerful an AR-15 is. And I've seen so many videos of little 8-10-year-old girls being properly supervised, and they're firing these guns left and right, from the hip and everything, because there's almost no recoil to those 223s and so on. And the same thing with black powder is an explosive, not a propellant, so it doesn't have the same sharp kick that a modern smokeless cartridge will have. And that's something that people don't think about.
And so do you think that, is there evidence that the pocket pistols were popular in Old Tombstone in the 1870s and 1880s, that women or even gamblers, people would carry an extra gun here and there in their vest or in their purse or on their body?
I'm sure they were, because whether if it was a quality arm like a 4-barrel Sharps pepper box or a Remington over and under Derringer or one of the Colt Derringers, or whether it was one of those 50-cent to $1 suicide specials that you fire it once and drop it down the outhouse so nobody finds it. They were so inexpensive, and everybody sold them. Some of those cheap guns were even given away when you bought tobacco and so on. You buy enough tobacco and they give you a pistol. There's a colorful legend of a gambler, a tin horn gambler, and he pulled out one of those little pocket pistols on a big old buffalo hunter, and the buffalo hunter looked at it, slapped it out of his hand, grabbed the gambler and said, if anybody ever shot me with one of these little pipsqueaks and I found out about it, I'd skin him alive.
Well, Phil, the reenactors love the history of Old Tombstone. And if one of our listeners was going to go out and make an initial purchase, if they wanted to gear themselves up with a short arm or a long arm that one of the Cowboys or one of the Earps might have been carrying in 1881, who do you think today makes some of the best reproductions of those historic firearms of 1881?
Well, there's a few companies. Most of them are made by either Uberti in Italy or the Pieta brothers, and Cimarron Arms, Taylor's Firearms, Dixie Gun Works. Go through the pages of True West and you'll see some great advertisements from some of these companies. And for the guy that wants the real deal, Colt is still making on a very limited basis their classic single action. They're more expensive, but it's an instant heirloom. And so there's several companies that make them. EMF is another company out of California. And all those replicas, they're all in good quality guns.
Well, Phil, we appreciate you coming on the show today, and we're going to have to book you here for another episode of Tales of Old Tombstone, and continue to talk about the firearms of the Old West. On our next episode, maybe we'll step back and talk a little bit about the black powder rifles that first came west and their evolution, and we're looking forward to having you on the show again, Phil.
Okay, and I know you're the editor, but if anybody else is listening and wants to find some good replicas, go through the pages of True West. You'll find them. They're there.
Well, thank you, Phil, and thank you, Bob, and we're going to send it right back to Stan, and thanks for listening to this week's episode of Tales of Old Tombstone.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, Phil. My goodness, you learn more here by accident than most places by design. My name is Stan Houston. It's been my privilege and my pleasure to bring this program to you. I'm the founder and creator of the Cowboy Spirit Radio Network, and we are proud to be able to present this fine program to you, and we're going to do so every week. So we hope you will come back. And thanks to you for your support. Thanks to the Tombstone Monument Ranch for allowing us to be on the premises and put the program together. And all the best to you. Walk tall, be good, and do good for one another. That's the cowboy way. All the best. Till next time, bye for now.
Big iron on his head. Big iron, big iron. When he tried to match the ranger with the big iron on his hip. Big iron on his head.